Abby Hathaway let out a small sigh as she stared at the screen of the laptop sitting on her worn-out office desk. Sadly, the last article she wrote had turned into a farewell message for the readers of the local newspaper, the Merrick Times. Only a few desks remained in the small newspaper office. As the image of the owner constantly harping about cutting costs crossed her mind, Abby stood up to turn off the lights at all the desks except her own. This newspaper, once beloved by many for capturing the local voices and detailing the events of the community, seemed destined to be crushed under the weight of the internet age. In an effort to adapt to the new era, Abby proposed various ideas, but the management never listened to her. Her voice went unheard, leading to the ironic situation where the newspaper itself was doomed to be buried in history. One day, when Abby was called to her boss's desk, she accepted her termination letter with tears in her eyes. "I've spent almost my entire life here. But now, it's over." Determined not to cry, Abby looked up as she walked back to her desk, filled with regret. As she stood up to turn off the lights after writing her final article, Abby remembered that moment. She then drifted out of the office, locking the door behind her. Outside, the cool evening air greeted Abby, and she hurriedly climbed into her longtime companion, a battered red Ford, eager to head home. When she arrived at her apartment, she quickly made her way to the first-floor apartment of an elderly couple. This elderly couple was a godsend, as they would watch her son Peter whenever Abby had to work late. Abby handed the old woman a loaf of bread she had picked up from a nearly closed grocery store on her way home, thanked them for taking care of Peter, and then headed up the stairs to their third-floor apartment with her son. There's no such luxury as an elevator in this old building. Once inside their apartment, Abby immediately began preparing dinner. As she watched the soup simmering on the stove, she realized she hadn't told the elderly couple that today was her last day working at the newspaper, and she regretted not mentioning that she wouldn't need their help watching Peter anymore starting tomorrow. "I'll have to tell them in the morning," Abby murmured. It's been almost 5 years since Abby became a single mother. Peter's father had tragically passed away in a car accident 5 years ago, on his way home from a night shift as a nurse. Suddenly losing her beloved husband and facing the reality of raising her young son alone, Abby was overwhelmed with grief. Although her husband's co-workers helped her get through the funeral, she collapsed in exhaustion as soon as she returned home. At that moment, her son, who had just turned 1, gently patted her head with his tiny little hand. That's when Abby made a vow: no matter what, she would ensure her son never felt lonely, hungry, or insecure. From that day until now, she had thrown herself into life, driven by that promise. But starting tomorrow, Abby won't have a workplace to go to, and it's only a matter of time before she gets evicted from their home. As the Merrick Times sales plummeted, the once reliable bonuses disappeared, and for the last 3 months, Abby hadn't received a proper paycheck. They had been living on the edge, depleting their small savings just to get by. But Abby had already fallen behind on last month's rent. For Abby, this town held too many sad memories, and there wasn't another newspaper that would likely hire her. But just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, an idea suddenly came to Abby's mind, and her eyes lit up. She decided to wait for the right moment to share this idea with Peter. "Peter, let's have dinner together. I made some warm soup, and I brought home some delicious bread too." Peter, excited, ran over with a big smile, saying, "Yay! I'm so hungry." They sat at the small table, facing each other. Peter happily sipped the soup and reached for the bread. As Abby ate her bread, she asked Peter, "Did you have fun at school today?" Peter's face darkened a little as he replied, "I like math. It's fun to use the blocks. I even did my homework, but..." His voice trailed off, and he looked down at the table. Abby waited patiently, gently watching Peter as he gathered the courage to continue. "But, in PE, we played catch. I wasn't very good at it. The teacher said it's okay, and that I'll get better if I keep trying. But the kid I was paired with said I should have my dad teach me how to play catch. But I don't have a dad." Watching her son's sad expression, Abby felt her heart clench, almost to the point of being unable to breathe. "I need to say something," Abby thought. She decided to share the idea that had just come to her. "Well, Peter, you're amazing for working so hard at math. I'm so proud of you. As for catch, we'll practice together from now on. And how about we start spring break a little early?" Peter's eyes widened in surprise. "What? But spring break isn't for another week." "I know, but wouldn't it be nice to start a little early? We could take a road trip in Mom's car and look for a new town where we'd like to live. Are we moving? Maybe. If we find a town we like, we could move there. I've been working at the newspaper for so long, and I think it's time for a little break. We could find a place where I could get a new job and where we could practice catch in the park. A trip with Mom. That sounds awesome." Seeing Peter's genuine smile, something she hadn't seen in a long time, finally allowed Abby to breathe a sigh of relief. She never wanted Peter to feel sad just because he didn't have a father. The next morning, Abby packed up their belongings in the old red Ford she'd been driving since college. She then went to the landlord, who lived nearby, and paid the remaining rent. Even though she knew that paying the overdue rent would leave her with almost no money, Abby couldn't bear the thought of causing trouble for the landlord, who had been kind enough to wait despite the delay. As Peter's mother, Abby wanted to do the right thing and be someone her son could be proud of. So she made sure to pay all the rent, and thanked the landlord for everything before saying goodbye. When Abby returned to the car, Peter was saying a tearful farewell to the elderly couple on the first floor. The kind couple gently patted Peter's head as he fought back tears. Abby thanked them for all their help and promised, "I'll be sure to stay in touch once we find a new place," before getting into the car with Peter. For Peter, this was his first trip alone with Abby. Saying goodbye to the elderly couple who had cared for him was tough. But as they left the familiar town behind and explored new scenery, Peter slowly began to forget the sadness of not having a father. To save money, Abby avoided the highways and took country roads, traveling from town to town. During the day, they would share sandwiches Abby had made on park benches, and stop at small local shops to buy things. By evening, they would find an RV park to park the car, take a shower, and sleep inside the car. Since it was still early spring, the nights were chilly, even with blankets. Abby made sure Peter was warm by laying thick cushions where he slept, and covering him with heavy blankets, while she used an old, thin blanket to keep herself warm. One night, Peter woke up and noticed Abby sleeping beside him with only the thin blanket. He spread his blanket over her shoulders to keep her warm. 3 days had passed as they continued their leisurely drive, passing through various towns and taking in different landscapes. That day, it had been raining heavily since morning, making it impossible for them to have their usual meal in a spacious park. They drove around, looking for a place to eat, but the weather was terrible. And with their limited money, staying at a motel was a luxury they couldn't afford. Before they knew it, they had arrived in a small town in New York. The town was peaceful, with old-fashioned streets that gave Abby a sense of calm for the first time in a while. She wished she could find a job in this town, hoping to regain some stability and create a safe environment for Peter. As they drove through the town, Peter's stomach growled from the back seat. He had been trying to hide his hunger so as not to worry Abby. Abby smiled and said, "Peter, you must be hungry." "I'm starving too. Look, there's a little grocery store over there. Let's get something to eat." She pulled the car into the parking lot of a small store with a sign that read Green's Grocery. The store had an old, weathered exterior, but the parking lot had a red tin roof that extended from the building, offering some shelter from the rain. "Peter, let's grab something to eat and take a little break," Abby said, smiling at her son. Peter nodded, and they carefully made their way into the store, trying not to slip on the wet pavement. As they entered, a kind-looking elderly woman with white hair, around 70 years old, greeted them warmly from behind the counter. "Hello there," she said. Her name was Susan Green. She had been running the store with her husband Ben for 45 years. After getting married and having a son, they had taken over Ben's parents' flower shop when their son turned 3, converting it into the grocery store it was today. Susan and Ben were known in the community as a hardworking and kind couple who always greeted everyone with a smile. They would often donate unsold items nearing their expiration date to those in need, and occasionally watched over children for single mothers who had nowhere else to turn. Unfortunately, 3 years ago, Ben passed away from an illness, and since then, their son John, who had been working as an athletic trainer in the city, returned to help his mother run the store. When Susan saw that Abby and Peter were soaked from the rain, she hurried to the back of the store to fetch some towels from the break room. "It's really coming down out there, isn't it? You both got soaked. Here, use these towels," she said, handing them soft towels with floral embroidery along the edges, her eyes filled with kindness. The sudden kindness made Abby's carefully held composure break, and she began to cry softly. She had lost her job, fallen behind on rent, and with each passing day of living out of her car, their savings dwindled. Despite all this, she had tried to stay strong for Peter's sake. But the weight of it all was overwhelming. Seeing his mother cry, Peter didn't know what to do. He took the towel Susan had given him and, in a flustered attempt to help, began wiping the raindrops off his mother's brown leather handbag. Observing the situation, Susan realized that Abby and Peter were in need of some help. "You must be exhausted. Why don't you rest here for a while? We have a break room in the back. With this weather, we won't have many customers today, so don't worry," she said gently. As they introduced themselves, Susan led them to the back of the store. The break room felt like a cozy room in a home, with a large olive green sofa where one could stretch out and a small kitchenette. "Our store used to be much busier. We'd open early in the morning and stay open late. So we set up this room so the staff could rest and prepare meals," Susan explained. "You don't want to catch a cold in those wet clothes. We have a few spare outfits here, so feel free to change into something dry." Fighting back tears, Abby thanked her and began to dry the droplets from Peter's slightly curly blonde hair with the towel. Susan offered Abby a t-shirt that was a bit too large for her, and some sweatpants to replace her soaked jeans, which she hung up to dry. Feeling a little more comfortable in the oversized clothes, Abby and Peter took the opportunity to rest for a while. When Peter smiled and said, "Thank you, Grandma," Susan sighed with relief and replied, "It's nothing, Peter. You're such a sweet boy. While Abby and Peter were changing clothes, Susan gathered a few items from the store, some heat-and-eat soup, ready-made macaroni and cheese, and bagels, and brought them to the pair. Grateful for Susan's kindness, Abby accepted her offer and rested on the sofa for a while, stretching her legs and filling her stomach for the first time in days. She began to feel her energy returning. With her partially dried clothes in one hand and holding Peter's hand with the other, Abby left the break room and thanked Susan. "Thank you for everything. I feel much better after resting, and the meal was delicious. You've been such a help. I'll come back to return the clothes and properly thank you." Susan watched them leave the store, a concerned look on her face. Just then, another customer walked in, and she wasn't able to call Abby and Peter back. From that day on, Abby and Peter began visiting Susan's store regularly, and their bond with her deepened. Abby and Peter, who had grown fond of the town, decided to stay for a while, parking their car in different spots around the town and seeing how it felt to live there. After 3 days, Abby and Peter had grown close to Susan, feeling comfortable enough to open up to her. Sensing their situation, Susan didn't just offer them food. She also slipped small treats or fruit into their shopping bags from time to time, showing her thoughtfulness. Peter started calling Susan Grandma and began to enjoy spending time with her. Abby, grateful for the kindness Susan had shown them when they first arrived, wanted to find a way to repay her. "Susan, you've done so much for us. Is there anything I can do for you?" After thinking for a moment, Susan replied, "My son usually helps me out here, since he started working at the store. He's also been coaching the basketball team at the local middle school in the evenings. But right now, he's attending a coaching workshop. It would really help me if you could lend a hand at the store until he returns." Abby was thrilled to be able to help Susan and immediately started pitching in. A few days later, one morning, when Abby and Peter arrived at the store to help out, they were greeted by a man they had never seen before, standing behind the counter. The man, with a bright smile and a strong, clear voice, spoke to them as they entered. "You must be Abby. And you must be Peter. My mother has told me so much about you too." The man was John Green, Susan's son. He was tall, with a gentle smile that resembled his mother's, and his warm personality was immediately apparent. John looked directly at Abby and Peter and said, "I hear you've been helping my mother while I was away. She's been so grateful to have you here." Abby, feeling a bit nervous, politely introduced herself. "Hello, I'm Abby Hathaway, and this is my son, Peter." Peter looked up at John and softly said, "Hi." John smiled warmly and gently patted Peter on the head, asking, "Peter, what do you like to do?" Peter thought for a moment and then replied with a slightly anxious look, "I like studying, but I'm not very good at sports." John, still smiling, suggested, "How about we try playing some basketball together sometime? It's a fun sport." Peter, a bit hesitant at first, seemed reassured by John's kind demeanor and replied, "Maybe I'd like to try." John nodded enthusiastically, pleased with Peter's response. "Great. Let's practice together sometime soon, okay?" "It's a promise." After a while, Susan came out from the back and saw the 3 of them together, smiling warmly. Well. It looks like you've all become fast friends. I'm so glad." "Abby, since John is here today, why don't you come over to my house and take your time to relax and chat?" Although Abby hesitated at first, she nodded gratefully. "Thank you so much. I'll take you up on that offer." Susan led Abby and Peter to her living room, which was located in the house behind the store. It was a warm, cozy space. Though the house and furniture were old, everything was well maintained, giving off a comforting, nostalgic scent. In the center of the living room stood a beautiful antique dining table, its wood grain showing the passage of time. The table's edges were rounded from years of use, and the surface bore small scratches and rings left by cups, each telling a story of the family's history. After seating Abby and Peter on the comfortable sofa in the living room, Susan returned with hot coffee for herself and Abby, and a sweet cocoa for Peter. As she looked at them, Susan said gently, "Abby, Peter, how about moving into the second floor of my house?" She smiled as if confident in her suggestion and continued, "The second floor of this house is empty now. It used to be home to my husband, son, and me, but my son moved out when he went to college, and my husband passed away 3 years ago. So now, I live here alone." Surprised by Susan's offer, Abby asked, "Isn't your son John going to live here?" "I'm really touched by your offer, but..." Susan reassured her. "No, John lives on the 3rd floor of an apartment building across from the store. He comes over for dinner every day after work, but he doesn't live here. So, don't worry. Abby, you and Peter have been living in your car, haven't you? That's not good for Peter's growth, and you need to rest as well. If you were to fall ill, it would break Peter's heart, and it would hurt me too. So, if you're okay with it, please move into the second floor of my house." Overwhelmed by Susan's kindness, Abby was at a loss for words. Seeing his mother's reaction, Peter eagerly said, "I want to live in Grandma's house. I'll help out around the house too." Seeing Peter's enthusiasm, Abby finally found her voice. "Susan, thank you so much. This means the world to us." That day, with John taking care of the store, Susan, Abby, and Peter spent the day tidying up the second floor, making the beds, and enjoying a cake Susan had made while sharing stories about their lives. As night fell, John closed up the store and joined them at Susan's house, where the 4 of them gathered around the table for dinner. The meal was a feast: warm soup filled with vegetables and chicken, freshly baked bacon bread, and Susan's special meatloaf. For the first time in a long while, Abby and Peter enjoyed a home-cooked meal while chatting with others, feeling their hearts soften with warmth. As they finished eating, Susan spoke up, addressing everyone at the table. "Abby, Peter, and John, I have something I need to talk to you all about." Taking a deep breath, Susan began to unburden herself from the worries she had been carrying. "I'm not sure how much longer we can keep this store running." John nodded solemnly and continued the conversation. "Ever since the big supermarket chain opened in town, we've been losing customers. Even with me helping out, if things continue like this, we might have to close the store." Susan added sadly, "If the number of customers keeps declining, we'll have no choice but to close down. And I might have to sell the store that holds so many memories of my husband." Peter sensed the seriousness of the conversation, and instinctively knew it wasn't the right time to speak. Abby listened intently as Susan and John spoke, her face serious and thoughtful. After a moment of contemplation, an idea came to her, and she decided to speak up. "Susan, I have a suggestion. What if we create a play area for children in a corner of the store? If we make it a place where mothers can shop with peace of mind, I think it would be a big hit. I remember struggling to shop when Peter was younger because there was nowhere to leave him. We could also consider hosting workshops where parents and children can learn to cook together. It would be a wonderful experience not only for single mothers or fathers, but for any parent and child to spend quality time together." John showed interest in the idea and spoke up. "That's a great idea. I'd be happy to help. We could even section off part of the parking lot to host events for kids. Or workshops for families. There's a lot we could do." Susan's eyes lit up at their suggestions. "That's wonderful. This could be a new service we offer to the community." Seeing the adults talking so optimistically, Peter felt it was finally okay for him to join the conversation. As their discussion continued, the four of them became more and more enthusiastic about how they could revive the store. John and Susan both fully supported Abby's ideas, and they decided to start putting them into action. Watching his mother confidently express her ideas in the face of challenges made Peter feel a deep sense of pride and admiration. Inspired by Abby's suggestions, Susan and John pulled out the store's budget sheets and floor plans and began planning right away. The next day, they started preparing to set up a play area for children in the store. And John reached out to local schools and families for support. Creating a space where mothers can shop without worry is a brilliant idea. "I've worked with the kids in this town, and it's great to be able to do something for them and their families," John said, genuinely praising Abby's ideas. Abby felt a sense of fulfillment as she saw her ideas taking shape. Peter also started helping out at the store with John, gradually growing closer to him. One day, John approached Peter. "Peter, do you remember what we talked about when we first met? Playing basketball together? I coach the middle school basketball team, and not all the kids start out being good. So, don't worry. If you're up for it, how about we give it a try?" Peter hesitated for a moment but was reassured by John's gentle smile. He broke into a grin and nodded. "Yeah, let's do it." From that day on, John began teaching Peter basketball during their breaks. He showed Peter the basic skills and gradually helped him build confidence. Peter started to see John as an older brother and looked forward to their basketball sessions. A few days had passed since Abby and Peter moved into Susan's house. They felt genuinely happy, especially Peter, who was overjoyed to finally be able to stretch out in a warm bed at night instead of sleeping in the car. Each night, he settled into his new room, and each morning, he woke up to sunlight streaming through the large windows. Moreover, with Abby deciding to make this town their final stop on their journey, Peter started attending the local elementary school with the new term. He made new friends at school, and with John around to play catch, Peter was truly happy. Susan, too, was grateful for Abby and Peter's help around the house and the store. Every time she saw their bright smiles, she felt fulfilled knowing she was making a difference in their lives. Gradually, customers began returning to Susan's store. The play area for children was especially popular with mothers of young kids, who appreciated being able to shop at their own pace. However, Susan still carried a lingering worry. Despite the small boost in customers, the store's financial situation remained precarious, and the threat of closure was not yet fully gone. One day, while Abby was helping prepare dinner, Susan called her over and sat down at the table with a serious expression. Susan had come to trust Abby, who was always attentive to details and quick to come up with ideas, and she decided to confide in her. "Abby, thanks to you, the store has started to regain some of its energy. But it's not widely known throughout the town yet. And simply providing a play area for children might not be enough in the long run." Abby understood that Susan was right. The play area idea hadn't reached many people yet, and the workshops were still in the planning stages, far from being fully established. Still, the fact that Susan was bringing this up made Abby realize how dire the situation must be for the store. At the same time, Abby had been looking for ways to apply her skills as a former journalist while helping out at Susan's store. Susan, you might be right. To get more people in the community to know about this store and to encourage them to visit, we may need some fresh ideas. Susan listened intently to Abby and replied, "Yes, but I haven't been able to think of anything yet. You're always so good at noticing the little things and coming up with ideas. So if you have any suggestions, I'd love to hear them and do whatever I can." Abby nodded thoughtfully and began brainstorming new ideas. That night, as she lay in bed reminiscing, she recalled her time studying abroad in Japan. Abby had spent 2 years as an exchange student at a university in Japan, living with a host family in the city of Kobe. That's it. What if we introduced bento at the store, she thought excitedly. She remembered how bento, meals in neatly packed boxes with a balanced variety of dishes, were widely popular among busy families and working mothers in Japan. The next morning, Abby shared her idea with Susan and John. They were both surprised, but Abby felt confident that this idea could bring them some hope. So she continued to explain. In Japan, bento is a meal that includes a balanced combination of a main dish, side dishes, and rice, all packed into a container about the size of your hand. Japanese students often bring these homemade bentos for lunch. They're visually appealing and nutritious for busy families and working people. Having a takeout option like this would be incredibly convenient. We could even set up a microwave in the store so customers can heat up their meals and eat them right away. Susan, who had been listening quietly, nodded deeply. That's a great idea. If people can get a balanced meal that's ready to eat right after purchasing it, it would save them the trouble of cooking at home. I think busy parents and people who don't have a cafeteria at work would really appreciate it. John was also impressed by the idea. We could also use the relationships Mom has built with local farmers over the years to provide bento meals made with seasonal ingredients. For example, we could offer pumpkin and apple bentos in the fall or fresh salads and grilled chicken in the summer. I think our customers would love that. Moreover, John saw this idea as a solution to a concern he'd been wrestling with. Actually, some of the kids on the basketball team I coach don't have very nutritious diets, and I've been worried about that. Bento meals could help support their health, and we could even hold workshops to teach them about the importance of balanced nutrition. Abby, encouraged by John's response, continued to build on the idea. In that case, we could also create a small eat-in area in the store. That way, people could heat up their bento and enjoy it right here. After basketball practice, the kids could come by for a meal, and it would also attract customers who want a quick meal during or after work. We could even spruce up the grassy area outside the store and add benches for people to relax. And, Abby added, besides just selling bentos, we could also offer workshops where parents and children can learn to make bento together. I could teach some simple and nutritious recipes that I learned in Japan. The conversation grew more and more detailed, and Abby, Susan, and John made a firm decision to work together to revive the small grocery store in this new way. A few days later, while Peter was at school, Abby, Susan, and John got to work. They started by creating an eat-in area near a window with a view, setting up a microwave, tables, and chairs. They also cleaned up the grassy area outside, adding benches and large umbrellas, turning it into a stylish terrace-like space. Now we've got a place where people can really enjoy their bento," Abby said with a satisfied smile as she looked over the new space. John nodded in agreement. "I hope this gives the kids more opportunities to enjoy their time here. I'll let the basketball team know about it. I think it'll be great for their health, too." With the space ready, they began stocking the store with the bento. Meals that Abby had envisioned from her study abroad experience. Since Abby's memory alone wasn't enough, she used her research skills to learn more about Japanese bento and crafted colorful, balanced meals with local ingredients that would appeal to the people in the town. When Peter returned from school, he was amazed. "Wow! There's a place to sit and eat inside the store now." A new bento corner was set up in the store, and a special promotion was launched to introduce it to local mothers. Abby used her former journalism skills to write an article highlighting the appeal of this new service, which was published in local online media and community bulletin boards. The bento quickly became a hit, especially among working mothers. They appreciated having a convenient, healthy meal option on days when they were too exhausted to cook after work. Busy moms started visiting Susan's store more frequently, grateful for the easy access to nutritious meals. Through the bento-making workshops, Abby provided a way for parents and children to spend quality time together, deepening the store's connection with local families. During the workshops, Abby taught simple Japanese bento recipes she had learned from her host family, as well as recipes using ingredients readily available in the area. The mothers were delighted to make bentos with their children, sharing the joy of cooking together and strengthening their family bonds. Peter also participated in the workshops, enjoying the experience of making bentos with his mom. "Mom, this bento looks so good," Peter said with a big smile. Abby nodded, pleased. "You did a great job, Peter. Now you've got a bento to take to school. Lunchtime will be even more fun." On another day, the middle schoolers from John's basketball team came to the store, where they enjoyed their bentos and spent time relaxing on the grassy terrace. Their parents also started attending the bento workshops, appreciating the chance to learn about nutrition together with their children. The bento that Abby envisioned didn't contain the traditional Japanese ingredients, but rather it was adapted to use local produce and featured familiar dishes that had been staples in the town's households for generations. This original twist made the idea widely accepted and welcomed by the community. Gradually, word of this new offering spread throughout the town, and the store began to regain its former vibrancy. Some customers even made special trips to the small grocery store just to buy the bento, and the eat-in space became increasingly popular. Susan was thrilled to see how this new initiative had brought fresh energy to the store. She was grateful for Abby's ideas, John's enthusiasm, and Peter's help, as she watched the store once again become an essential part of the community. "Abby, your brilliant idea saved this store. Thank you so much," Susan said one day, her voice filled with gratitude. Abby smiled warmly and replied, "I'm so glad I could help make this store a beloved place in the community again. Let's keep working together." One day, as Abby and Susan were going over the store's accounts and discussing its current sales and financial situation, John came in from the back with tea. Peter, eager to help, took the tea from John and carefully placed it on the table. "Thanks, Peter." "That's a big help," John said, patting Peter on the head. Peter responded proudly with a smile. When Peter exclaimed, "I just want to help the store too," both Abby and Susan exchanged smiles. "That's the spirit, Peter. There's a lot you can do," John said, placing a hand on Peter's shoulder. For example, you can help stock the shelves or recommend the bento to customers. If you become the face of the store, maybe even more people will start coming by. Peter's eyes lit up as he nodded enthusiastically. From the next day, Peter stood near the register, proudly recommending the bento his mother had made to customers. When kids came in, he would eagerly say, "This is really delicious," bringing smiles to everyone's faces. Watching her son grow up before her eyes filled Abby with joy. As the weekend approached, Susan's store was set to host a parent-child cooking class event. And the four of them were busy with preparations. Abby created flyers and posted them on local online media and community boards to attract as many families as possible to the event. John distributed the flyers around town and even called the local radio station to promote the event. Susan decorated the store with special touches to create a warm and welcoming atmosphere. "Peter, are you going to help today too?" John asked. And Peter replied enthusiastically, "Of course." While Abby gathered the ingredients for the cooking class, she asked Peter, "Could you set up the tools on the tables for the customers?" With his small hands, Peter carefully arranged pots, cutting boards, and other utensils, efficiently preparing everything for the event. "Way to go, Peter. You're such a big help," Susan said with a smile. "We really appreciate your assistance." Peter, proud of the praise, beamed and said, "I hope lots of people come." Thanks to the collective efforts of the four of them, the event drew many parents and children to the store. And many of those who attended became regular customers afterward. This success gave the four of them a big boost in confidence. Later that day, after they returned home and discussed it, they decided to hold a bento festival at the store in 2 weeks. This event was designed to introduce the special bento menus Abby had created to a wider audience in the community. The preparation for the event was intense, but once again, they all worked together. John set up special tents for the event, while Susan prepared handmade decorations and posters. Peter also contributed by hanging the Bento Festival banner outside the store and enthusiastically inviting customers to join in the celebration. On the day of the festival, families with children, local residents, and even adults looking for a healthy lunch during their work break gathered in front of the store. A variety of bento menus created by Abby were displayed, and John greeted customers with a smile, introducing the products. "This one is a healthy bento made with fresh, local vegetables. It's perfect for enjoying a balanced meal even on a busy day," John explained, drawing interest from customers who eagerly made purchases. Peter, too, happily chatted with customers, proudly saying, "My mom made this one," as he handed them their bentos. Abby, who was also helping sell the bentos at the store, was approached by a customer who said, "Abby, since your store's bento has so many different ingredients, my daughter, who used to hate vegetables, now eats them all. Thank you for making such wonderful bentos." The words of gratitude brought tears to Abby's eyes. As Susan looked around the bustling store, she smiled with satisfaction. Now our store has truly become a place loved by everyone in the community. As the event came to an end, the store was busier than it had ever been, and the four of them exchanged satisfied smiles. Later that evening, after all the bentos prepared for the event had been sold out, Abby took a moment to catch her breath. Just then, John came over with Peter, holding a basketball. John was smiling, clearly pleased with how much Peter had improved. "Peter, you were really on fire today. You're getting so much better," John said, his voice full of pride. Peter, a little shy but clearly pleased, grinned. Yeah, it's because you're such a good teacher, John. I want to keep practicing more. John handed the basketball to Peter and turned to Abby, smiling. I'm really impressed with Peter's progress. He's even started bonding with the middle schoolers I coach and playing with them. Abby, beaming with pride for her son, smiled warmly at John and said, "Thank you so much, John. You've become such an important person in Peter's life. He really looks up to you." John, a bit embarrassed but serious, looked into Abby's eyes and replied, "It means a lot to me too, Abby. Having you both here has made a big difference in my life. I believe that together, we can continue to support this store and the community." Abby felt her heart warm at John's words, realizing that they were growing closer. Reflecting on the tough times she had gone through, she began to feel that with John and Susan by her side, they could build a future together. As time passed, the bond between Abby and John deepened, and Peter grew to admire John more and more. Susan found joy in watching the three of them spend time together like a family. Months went by, and the store that Abby, John, Susan, and Peter had been running together became increasingly successful. The parent-child cooking workshops and bento sales gained a reputation, making the store an indispensable part of the community. The eat-in area they had created in one corner of the store, along with the grassy area outside, was bustling with families on weekends. As the store grew busier, the three adults and Peter couldn't manage it all on their own. So they hired a few part-time workers. This allowed them to take some time off together and enjoy their days off. One day, Susan invited Abby and John to her living room for lunch, and she began to talk about the future. "Abby, John, thank you both so much. This store has come back to life because of you two, and I'm so happy about it. But I think it's time for me to retire and enjoy a quieter life. Of course, I love this store, so I'll still drop by every day," she added with a smile. Abby and John exchanged surprised looks, but Susan continued with a gentle smile. "That's why I want to officially hand over the store to both of you. I'm confident that you two will make it an even better place. Now, it's my turn to help you." For a moment, Abby was speechless. While she felt deeply grateful for Susan's trust, the weight of the responsibility also made her feel a bit overwhelmed. However, John quickly smiled and placed a reassuring hand on Abby's shoulder. "Thank you, Mom. We'll take good care of the store and help it grow even more. With Abby by my side, I know we can make it a success." Encouraged by John's words, Abby nodded firmly. "Thank you, Susan. We'll take care of this precious store and continue making it a place that the community loves." A few weeks later, Abby and John officially took over the store's management. Peter continued to help out, and Susan, true to her word, visited the store every day, enjoying conversations with the customers. In this way, the bond between the small town's grocery store and the community grew even stronger. One day, John was preparing a special dinner to propose to Abby. After the store had closed for the day, John lit candles in a corner of the eat-in area and prepared a homemade dinner for Abby. "Abby, ever since you and Peter came to this town, my life has truly become richer. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, as a family, here in this town," John said as he handed Abby a small ring box. "Will you marry me?" Overwhelmed with surprise and joy, Abby beamed and answered, "Yes, of course, John." They embraced right there, both envisioning a happy future together. A few months later, Abby and John were married, and the two of them began their new life as a family with Peter. John moved out of his third-floor apartment across from the store and the four of them decided to live together in Susan's house. Although Susan had suggested, "You're newlyweds, so you should get a new place and not worry about me," both Abby and Peter knew they would miss having Susan around. They persuaded her to stay, and the four of them continued living together. The once quiet house where Susan had lived alone became lively. With Peter's room and Abby and John's bedroom upstairs, Susan's bedroom and the family's living room on the first floor, the kitchen where Abby and Susan cooked together, and the garden where John and Peter practiced basketball together. Finally, Abby was able to write a postcard to the kind elderly couple who had taken care of Peter in their old town, informing them, "We found a new place to call home." Peter was thrilled about the arrival of a new sibling and enjoyed playing catch with John, no longer feeling that he wasn't good at sports. Abby, too, found fulfillment in her life as a mother and as a co-manager of the store. A year later, Abby gave birth to their second child, and their days became even more filled with happiness. Peter enjoyed taking care of his baby brother and playing basketball with John, making the most of his joyful days. As Abby watched John cradle their newborn and play basketball with Peter, her heart swelled with happiness. "We'll keep building happy days together as a family," she thought. When she looked up, she saw Susan watching the three of them with a warm smile, her eyes reflecting pride and contentment. As the sun set, the family gathered around the table, their laughter filling the air, while the store outside continued to bustle as usual. As another day came to an end, Abby sighed deeply, knowing that many more happy days lay ahead. This sigh was the complete opposite of the one she had let out in that lonely newspaper office so long ago. Two mothers and their sons, once faced with difficult circumstances, had come together to revive a small grocery store, turning it into a beloved place for the community. And in the process, they had formed a new family, destined to live happily ever after.